The year is 1716, the North Atlantic. For the crew of the Sea Devil, hell isn't the heat of the Caribbean. Hell is this icy storm. Their enemy is not the king's fleet, but a cold that chills them to the bone. And the main problem is that their only salvation, fire, would kill them even faster. Surviving on a floating powder keg when you desperately need a fire. The solutions these pirates found were both brilliant and insane. This was the time of the Little Ice Age. Winters had become abnormally harsh, turning the ocean into a frozen wasteland. And on board, there could be up to 40 barrels of gunpowder, nearly 1.5 tons of pure explosives, waiting for a single stray spark. The danger of fire was absolute. This wasn't just a wooden ship, it was timber soaked deep with flammable resin for water protection. It was tarred ropes and sails that would ignite like paper. It was a chain reaction, a death sentence, not just a fire. The entire rigging and hull were coated in what was called Stockholm tar, a substance almost as flammable as gasoline. A fire on such a vessel spread with terrifying speed. A ship the size of the Queen Anne's Revenge could be completely engulfed in flames in less than 10 minutes. But the cold created not one, but many problems. How do you cook a hot meal without an open flame? How do you dry clothes soaked through to the skin? How do you keep the fresh water in the barrels from turning to ice? How do you maintain morale when fingers can't even bend around the hilt of a cutlass? There was another, less obvious enemy. In the bitter cold, the tarred hemp ropes didn't just freeze, they became as brittle as glass. Any sudden gust of wind could snap them, leaving the ship without control. The cold attacked not only the men, but the ship itself, turning it into a fragile, icy trap. The solution was hidden in the heart of the ship. The galley. Its name was the brazier. A simple metal box filled with hot coals from the only safe hearth on board. This wasn't fire. It was its canned energy. For an 18th century pirate, the brazier was what a power bank is to us today, a way to store heat in a safe form and move it to where it was needed most. They used dense oak charcoal for this, which smoldered for hours with almost no sparks. The brazier wasn't placed in the middle of the deck for everyone to warm up. It wasn't a fireplace, but rather a surgical tool. Its heat was applied with extreme precision, to warm the helmsman's frozen hands before a storm, to place by a wounded man's bunk to keep him from dying of hypothermia, or, in a desperate gamble, to slowly and carefully dry damp gunpowder before a battle. It was a tool not for comfort, but for survival. But this salvation had a dark side. The smoldering coals in a sealed hold devoured oxygen. In return, they exhaled an invisible enemy, carbon monoxide. Sailors called it the silent killer, the ghost of the coal fire. It had no color, no smell. The choice was brutal: freeze to death on deck or suffocate in the warmth below. The heat of the brazier was like a siren's song. It lulled the freezing sailor, promising salvation, but led him straight into an eternal, breathless sleep. This presented the captain with an impossible choice. You have one such heater. Who gets the warmth? The wounded helmsman, on whom the entire ship's life depends, or a dozen freezing sailors in the forecastle who might mutiny in an hour? This wasn't a question of mercy. It was the captain's calculus, the cruel arithmetic of survival where one key life was worth more than a dozen ordinary ones. But even this brutal calculation didn't solve the main problem. 1 or 2 braziers were a drop in a frozen ocean. They couldn't heat a ship that housed 100 men. Modern calculations show that one such brazier produced between 500 and 700 watts of heat. That's barely enough to warm your bathroom. Trying to heat a drafty wooden hull with it was like trying to bail out a storm with a thimble. The crew needed something more powerful, more substantial, and they found the solution where they least expected it, in their own arsenal. There comes a point when the temperature drops below freezing, when the metal parts of the ship are coated in a crust of ice, and the timber of the hull begins to make a new, eerie sound. It's not the familiar creak. It's a high, groaning crack. This is the sound of freezing moisture tearing the wood fibers apart from the inside. The ship was literally screaming from the cold. And in that moment, an idea was born. Perhaps it occurred to a gunner, a man who knew from experience how long red-hot cast iron holds its heat. A cannonball. It doesn't burn. It doesn't spark. It simply absorbs heat and slowly, predictably radiates it for hours. This wasn't an invention. It was a brilliant adaptation. The pirates took the military technology of heated shot, designed to burn enemy ships, and turned it on its head. A deadly weapon of destruction became an instrument of salvation. The process was simple and deadly dangerous. Using long, blacksmith-like tongs, a cannonball heated red-hot was pulled from the galley furnace. It was carefully lowered into a metal bucket half filled with sand. The sand served two purposes. First, it kept the heavy ball from rolling around on the deck as the ship pitched, and second, it acted as a diffuser, making the heat radiate more gently and evenly. A single 24-pound cannonball could give off noticeable heat for up to 3 hours. It was the world's first portable heat battery. The secret is in the physics. A massive piece of cast iron has enormous heat capacity. Unlike fire, which mainly heats the air, the cannonball works like a radiator. It emits heat in all directions as infrared waves, warming not the air but the objects around it, walls, furniture, people. The cannonball acted like a sponge for fire. In the furnace, it absorbed a colossal amount of thermal energy. Then, in a cabin, it slowly squeezed that energy out into the space. This was far more efficient than any open fire, which loses most of its energy with the escaping smoke. Let's rate this technology on a scale of pirate ingenuity. For brilliance, 10 out of 10. For safety, a solid 8 as long as you don't drop it on your foot. And for accessibility, 11 out of 10. Because if there was one thing they had in abundance, it was cannonballs. This is a perfect example of survivalist thinking, where familiar objects take on a new, life-saving function. And this pirate discovery proved so successful that it was later adopted by official navies for polar expeditions in the 19th century. What was born of desperation in the icy Atlantic became standard procedure for professional Arctic explorers. But even a dozen heated cannonballs couldn't solve the main problem, warming the people. And so, the pirates turned to the oldest and most reliable source of heat, themselves. Sailors off watch would huddle together in the most sheltered corner of the hold. They lay side by side, shoulder to shoulder, creating a living cocoon of warmth. This is the intuitive physics of survival. An adult man's body at rest generates about 100 watts of heat. 10 such bodies pressed together become a kilowatt heater. The pirates were unconsciously using the same principle as penguins in Antarctica, a method biologists call group thermoregulation. Of course, this only worked if the heat wasn't wasted. This is where clothing came into play. A woolen jersey was your second skin. Cotton, once wet, turned into a cold compress, sucking the life out of you. Wool, however, thanks to its natural lanolin and structure, provided warmth even when completely soaked. Over this, they wore a tarred cloak, impervious to both wind and water. Several thin layers worked better than one thick jacket, creating pockets of air. It was a personal thermos for the body. In winter, a cotton shirt was a death sentence written in fabric. And yet, there seemed to be another quicker way to get warm. A swig of rum. A pleasant, burning warmth instantly spreads through the body, but it's a deadly illusion. Alcohol dilates the blood vessels near the skin's surface. Warm blood rushes to it, creating a false sense of comfort. In reality, your body is losing precious heat at a catastrophic rate. The warmth from alcohol is a loan you take from your vital organs, a moment's relief in exchange for the slow freezing of your body's core. The famous St. Bernard rescue dogs in the Alps never carried barrels of brandy. That was an artist's invention. Real rescuers knew that giving alcohol to a freezing person was to hasten their death. Picture the scene. A young greenhorn, teeth chattering, reaches for a bottle. But an old bosun's hand grabs his wrist. He doesn't give a lecture on physiology. He simply says, "That fire is fake, son. It'll burn you from the inside out, and the sea will get nothing but a cold shell." Want to get warm? Go scrub the deck until the sweat freezes on your brow. Instead of rum, an experienced sailor would have given the novice a mug of hot bumbo, a drink of rum, water, sugar, and nutmeg. The secret wasn't the alcohol, it was the sugar. Pure calories. It was fuel for the body's true internal furnace, allowing it to generate real heat, not its dangerous imitation. But all these tricks were fighting the wrong enemy. The main killer on board wasn't the frost itself, but its wet, invisible ally, dampness. In a sea storm, nothing stayed dry. Clothes, bedding, the very timber of the hull, everything was soaked through with icy water. And here, the ruthless laws of physics take over. Water conducts heat 25 times more effectively than air. This means wet clothing doesn't just fail to keep you warm, it turns into a pump that sucks the heat from your body with monstrous speed. Dry cold is a pickpocket. It steals your warmth little by little, unnoticed. Wet cold is a mugger with a knife. It knocks you down and takes everything at once, leaving no chance. But the enemy wasn't just outside. It was born within. Even in a sealed hold, the breath of dozens of men made the air thick and humid. In one night, a single person exhales up to half a liter of water. A crew of 80 men literally breathed 40 liters of moisture into the confined space, every single night. This moisture condensed on the cold walls and ceiling, creating what sailors called internal rain. Everything became sticky and damp. Any source of heat, be it a brazier or a heated cannonball, had to be used primarily for drying clothes. A dry shirt was more valuable than a hot meal. And this constant draining discomfort did something worse than just freeze the body. It corroded the soul. Aching joints, apathy, the slow fading of the will to live. In such conditions, any minor quarrel, any sideways glance could become a spark. Cold and dampness are gunpowder for a mutiny. This is why many pirate codes so fiercely forbade fighting on board. It wasn't about well-being, it was the harsh mathematics of control. A captain knew that maintaining discipline in a crew freezing in wet clothes was harder than boarding a military frigate. All these desperate solutions can be boiled down to 3 simple rules, 3 laws of survival carved into the frozen timber of the ship. The first law, don't try to tame open fire. Instead, charge safe carriers with heat, braziers, cannonballs, heated stones. Any object that could store heat and release it slowly was a pirate's best friend. This was their key technological breakthrough, an intuitive discovery of a basic principle used today on nuclear submarines. The reactor, a source of colossal energy, is securely isolated, while a safe carrier, water or steam, distributes the heat through the compartments. The pirates had stumbled upon the basics of nuclear engineering using only a furnace and cast iron. The second rule was no less important. Don't try to heat the ocean. Create barriers. The entrances to the crew's quarters were hung with old sails, which were intentionally soaked with water. In the cold, the sail turned into an ice wall, impenetrable to the wind. Wear layered clothing. Sleep huddled together. Any action that created an insulated air pocket increased the chances of survival. This very rule changed the nature of piracy. In the northern seas, when a ship was captured, the most valuable cargo wasn't chests of gold, but bales of wool, barrels of animal fat to waterproof boots, or spare sails to insulate cabins. Pirates plundered not for luxury, but for the chance to survive another night. And finally, the third and most important law, which pirates learned with their own blood. Your main enemy isn't the cold. Your main enemy is water. Dry your clothes at all costs. Avoid getting wet. Don't drink rum, which makes you lose heat even faster. If you defeat the dampness, you will survive the frost. Modern survivalists and special forces know this mantra by heart. Cotton kills, and moisture is the executioner. But it wasn't written in tactical manuals. It was written in the suffering and frostbite of sailors hundreds of years before the invention of synthetic fabrics. We've covered the brilliant and desperate methods of pirates, but which of these surprised you more? The incredible ingenuity of using heated cannonballs, or the deadly lie about the warming effects of rum that many still believe today? Write just one word in the comments: cannonballs or rum. Let's see what impressed you more. And as you write your answer, consider this. These solutions weren't born in laboratories. They were born of pure desperation. This proves that the greatest driver of ingenuity isn't comfort, but the threat of imminent death.